Hey everybody, PS360 back, and the only thing left standing between the campaigner and domination in the Lost Land is us. We've come a long way, made several friends that we're going to get reintroduced to here, including one new friend that we haven't gotten to use yet. A Chronoceptor that's in our hands right now is unique. It's the only Chronoceptor that this game has, and it doesn't have ammo refills. So it's kind of nice that it doesn't give it to us until the very end of the game, since we wouldn't have a way to refill it if we wasted shots on something else. As far as what it does, think of it like the fusion cannon. It has a slight charge up before firing off a massive blinding flash, except instead of having a large area of effect, it's got a very small focal point where its damage comes from. The damage in it is massive, however. It'll take you from full health to nothing in one shot if you fire it at your feet. And we already took out the Dinosaur, which would have been behind us anyway. So are these guys less food and more of an example? We gotta get some vengeance for them then. Eat it. Now, since we only have 3 shots, you generally don't want to miss. Like that. Now, we only hit it with 2 out of those 3 shots. And you could see it did almost half his health and damage. So let's size up our opponent and see what he can do. We've seen he's been able to do that stomp. He can try to take a couple of swipes at us with the pickaxe, and he's got that firewall. He can teleport up to the top of the arena and rain down some little blue fireballs. And he's got this cross-shaped fireball. And he's got one more, but he doesn't like to use it until he's low health. So let's just lay a couple of fusion rounds into him. Or we can't. Maybe the particle accelerator will do some damage. Okay. Well, that's weird. That's even weirder. Well, for starters, that's his last attack, that firing the blue energy balls from the ground. The shield around the campaigner comes from his immunity to the fusion cannon and the particle accelerator. If you try to fire either of them, he just laughs at you and gets that shield around him for a second. I really have no idea what was causing that pushback. I'm guessing it's because one of the shots out of the particle accelerator actually connected with him. Though it did result in pushing the cross-shaped fireball back at him, and pushing him back away from us when he teleported. The minigun that I'm using on him now is not a bad choice. It does solid damage, but there's better options out there. Considering how much he runs up into your face, you generally don't want to use explosives on him too much, or anything that doesn't really have any hit scan properties to it. That was kind of weird too, that little astral projection that it fired up, or that he fired up before he teleported. Okay, well, like I was saying, the minigun's not a bad choice, but there are better choices. Pretty much anything that's rapid fire with some fast shots or hit scan stop properties is going to be good for him. So minigun's probably going to be the second best choice, but much like Long Hunter, our best choice is going to be good old-fashioned auto shotgun. Don't tell me he's still not dead. Oh, thank God. Now we can celebrate our well-earned victory. Turok, there's something wrong with your leg. Turok? No, as we kind of hobble out of the campaigner stronghold. It's better than getting blown up, I guess. Push through the pain. We've reached the end. The campaigner's beaten. And there really isn't anything left to do except for let this lone soldier reflect on his life choices as he realizes he picked the losing side. I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about some of Turok's design decisions, some stuff that I had noticed while playing. Maybe some of it was accidental, or maybe they intended to do all of it, who knows. Now, the main focus on Turok was exploration. According to the developer, Turok conceptually began as a third-person game similar to Mario 64 and Tomb Raider and other games of that style. The viewpoint eventually switched to a first-person view to better show off the 3D capabilities of the game and the Nintendo 64. The levels themselves do seem to have been designed around this theme of exploration first and combat second. The levels are massive, and they loop in and around themselves, and they're filled with narrow ledges, branching paths, jumping puzzles, lots of jumping puzzles. And the only other major release up until this point that's had this much 3D platforming from a first-person perspective has been Quake. And Quake's target audience was far from what Turok's target audience would have been. And to ease new players into this style of gameplay from a first-person viewpoint, Iguana gave the players the auto map. It made lining up the jumps easier. It eased exploration. But roughly 3/4 of the way through the first level, we encounter an area where the map is disabled. And this is done to hide the first Chronoceptor piece, but it was also a good intro into easing the player out of the auto map. Now, they gave it to them to start, so that they would have a good idea of how Turok handled its space, but eventually they were going to take it away to add to the difficulty of later jumping puzzles. The environments also followed a gradual shift between a jungle, more native setting to the mechanical stronghold appropriate for the cyborg campaigner. Now, despite a gradual shift, the levels themselves all did feel like they were individually different from each other, factoring in tone, visuals, the layout of the level, and a few memorable set pieces like the jumps leading up to Long Hunter. The environments are made even more impressive by the enemy design. All the enemies seem to fit the theme of the area that they're in, with some, like Leapers and Perlin, having stages of growth or other hierarchy to make them feel more like a species and place them better in the environment. It takes some cues from Doom, in that it's one of the only other games I can think of that has infighting between enemies. Actually, Doom and Hexen are the only games I can think of that had infighting. Now, let's look at the meat of any good first-person shooter, and one of Turok's main sources of praise in its weapon design. Since it's the first game in the series, the weapons are a little more realistic than later entries. Now, the weapon variety is largely an expansion on the standard FPS fare set in place as far back as Doom. You have a pistol, a shotgun, the assault rifle replaces like a machine gun style weapon, the minigun is a chain gun, the rocket launcher did get an upgrade and fires 4 rockets at once now. The pulse rifle is extremely similar to Doom's plasma cannon. The grenade launcher is just a grenade launcher a la Quake, but it is a good weapon to show off the physics of the game and the depth of going through a 3D world. Turok introduces us to its main character, Talset, as a Native American through what looks like a handmade bow and knife. There was a tomahawk at one point, but it was thought to be too similar to the knife to be kept in. Now, very quickly after that, we get our first weapon with the pistol. And from there, go back through those standard FPS weapons that I talked about before we get to some of the more unique weapons. And the first one that we get is probably the pulse rifle. Now, even though it is almost exactly the same as Doom's plasma cannon, and there's probably an homage there, it at least feels different from the other weapons up until that point, in that you pick it up and you immediately realize this is definitely not a normal gun. After those previous more standard weapons, we get other things like the particle accelerator, which you can charge up to increase both the damage and the area of effect at the cost of more ammo. Makes it an ideal weapon for groups of, say, mid-tier and lower enemies. The alien weapon, which has a delayed explosion at the point of impact and feels a little bit designed for crowd control. Also, I hate it. And the fusion cannon, which feels like an homage to Doom's BFG with slightly different mechanics. And then we have the Chronoceptor, which is also similar to a BFG. Now, the large arsenal and several uses for the weapons encourages a run-and-gun style of gameplay where you're out in the open actively dodging, and rarely do you need to take cover behind walls. The game will automatically switch you from an empty weapon to something with ammo, and will not allow you to select another empty gun by accident, making sure you always have something to shoot with. The map cursor doubling as a target reticle encourages you to play with the map turned on, so you always know where you stand in the environment, and you can better dodge incoming fire and enemies. Respawning enemies encourages players to keep moving and finish encounters quickly. The shotgun shells and normal arrows not working on the metallic enemies does work against this a bit, as you can end up with a weapon that just won't work. But it's not exactly hard to work around, so it's a minor quip at best. All this together does make Turok feel like it's encouraging you to be faster at the game and just kind of run through encounters, picking off enemies as you go. Nothing's perfect though, so where were Turok's faults at? Now, the biggest one is that it's very easy to get lost in some levels, the catacombs especially. A lot of the areas blend together in other levels, but level 5 in particular has a lot of extremely same-looking areas and branching paths that branch out into other branches. The levels can outstay their welcome after a while. They do a good job of making the areas feel different throughout the course of the levels, so this one's kind of minor as well, and really only stands out if you play on hard mode. Turok took its difficulties from what was prevalent at the time, and did what a lot of other games did. Harder difficulty means enemies get increased health and damage multipliers. Higher health results in some enemies becoming bullet sponges, and the increased damage means you have to play more defensively than you normally would. Both of these together mean that encounters will take longer, making already lengthy levels seem even longer. Respawning enemies will just make you say screw it and just run through some areas or avoid areas altogether. For as varied as the weapons are, they do overlap in some ways, resulting in some weapons being just inferior at certain roles and not really shining at anything, such as the alien weapon. Now, the loss of the backpack on death is a harsh penalty on hard mode as well, where the added ammo capacity is needed to take down some of these higher health enemies. The bottom line question for any game is the game fun to play? And for that, I will absolutely say resoundingly yes. The environments keep your interest due to the well laid out paths and huge open areas with multiple paths to encourage exploration. The enemy and weapon variety are different enough that you don't really get bored of shooting things, and new weapons and enemies come up often enough that you're not really given the chance to. Death isn't a big deal in normal difficulty, where the checkpoint system and save points ensure you don't usually lose too much progress early on, and lives are easy enough to come by that you can just jump back in and keep going. Considering that this was their first foray into the series, or really their first foray into FPS games in general, I'd say Iguana did an extremely impressive job. Just don't play on hard mode for your first run through. See you in Turok 2.